Well, hello friends, and welcome back to God's Blueprint for Raising World Changers. So we've been talking about how we view our children. And in the last video, we talked about, viewing our children through their behavior is very counterproductive. And so I want to continue in the next few videos to talk about how we see our children and understanding your child. Because if you don't understand what motivates your child, or why he does the things he does, or what he needs from you, then how can you be a good parent? And so in this video, I'm going to talk about the number one thing that every child needs to succeed in life. And I'm talking about success in every aspect of his life. And so this one thing, I call it the rocket fuel of parenting, or the secret to parenting success, because it is that important. And I learned about this over the course of raising my own children and looking back and seeing what made the difference for them. And then as I began to quantify those things, it all boiled down to this one thing. And it's backed up by science as well, and by the field of psychology and even the Bible. And so that's the most important thing, right? But those, truth lines up. It always lines up whatever field it comes from. Truth is truth, regardless of whether it's discovered by a believer or a non-believer. And so we can find truth in many different, from many different sources. So the one thing that every child needs to succeed in life is parental approval. Now, what does that mean? Well, the reality is it's almost the same thing as unconditional love. But if I say unconditional love to you, that's a very vague statement. And love is a word that's overused and underestimated or understood or misunderstood. And we use it in so many different ways. In fact, one therapist said to a friend of mine's child that, well, she actually said it to my friend, that your child knows that you love her, but she needs to know that you approve of her. And so unconditional love is actually what we get from our Heavenly Father, right? He is the model of the perfect parent. And if you think about it, unconditional love accepts and approves of you regardless of your behavior. So God the Father approved of us before we deserved it, so much so that He gave His Son to die for us while we were yet sinners. In other words, He saw the value in us before we even displayed any value. And we talked a little bit about this in the last video, that we have to learn to see who our children are made to be, not what we see right now. And that's the process of walking by faith in our parenting, that we understand what the Father has already planned for our child before we see it. In fact, we're the agent of bringing that God's plan out of the spirit realm into our child's life. And so that's how we do it. We do it by showing him who he is before he knows it, by telling him, by seeing him that way. So this need and this desire for approval, it kind of is counterintuitive to what we've always thought about kids, like that they're born driven by driven by sin or sinful nature. And no, it's not true. They're actually driven by this innate desire for parental approval. And one particular study said that this desire is so strong and so deeply rooted that it continues into adulthood. And even adult children that never felt their parents' approval are still looking for that. Or even if they've gotten approval, we all want our parents' approval, right? I mean, it's just kind of like makes us feel like that we're good enough. And that's actually what parental approval does. It tells your child that you are good enough for me. In fact, another scientist put it this way, and one study said that every child comes into the world with two questions. Number one, who am I? They need to know their identity, who they are, tell me who I am. And the second question is, do I have value? And so when we show approval of something, we're putting value on it. If you think about a stamp, the Good Housekeeping seal always gave us confidence in buying that product because we knew they reviewed it and it had value. It was worth what you were going to pay for it. And so this process of putting value on something is actually how we send the messages of approval. Now, we're going to get into some more hands-on techniques and ways that you can send messages of approval. In fact, this whole course is built on that we see our children as already good enough, already having value, already worthy of our approval before they ever do anything. It's kind of like Jesus' baptism. You know, when he came up out of the water and the heavens opened and everyone heard the voice and it said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." So Jesus hadn't done one miracle. He hadn't started his ministry yet. He hadn't healed one sick person. He hadn't preached a sermon. But the Father said, "I'm well pleased in him just because he's my son." And so I remember when my youngest son was born, and we didn't know when I was pregnant that he had Down syndrome. So when he was born, you know, we were pretty surprised. But my mom made the observation that we loved him just the same as our other children. Of course we would, just because he's our child, not because of anything he can do or his ability or anything else, just because he is our son. And you know, every human has the same innate value as the next. In fact, children are more pure, as we talked about in the last video. Jesus said they're fit for heaven, just as they are. They're more pure. They're you know, less polluted or as adults are. You know, they haven't been through the trials of life and made the mistakes and bad choices. And so if you wanted to quantify value, I think children would come out on the greater end of that equation. But the reality is we all have the same value because we're all made in the image of God. And so in that sense, our children are our equals, and we should never talk down to them. We should never tell them that they're not good enough. And see, when we parent through that approach of behavior, and we're judging them based on their behavior and calling their behavior good and bad, we're sending those messages that they're not good enough. You have to behave before you're good enough is the message we're sending to them. So it's very destructive. And so these messages of approval that we send, and we can learn how to correct behavior without destroying the child's sense of self, because messages of approval actually create their self-esteem. When I show my approval to you, it builds you up. And when I show disapproval, it tears you down. And so that's what we're doing with our children when we parent through that perspective of behavior, and we're responding to their good behavior with approval and their bad behavior with disapproval. And they learn that their approval is based on their ability to perform. And we know that as adults that that's so destructive, that, you know, that just destroys a person, that we're always striving to do more and be more, because when you measure yourself or anyone else based on how well you can do anything, you can always do more and be better. And so parenting from the tree of life, then we begin to speak life over our children and tell them who they really are, what God made them to be, and how amazing they are before we see it. And I talked about that in the last video. But you know, I learned this lesson about approval in my own life because when I was growing up, you know, my parents didn't know. They did the best they could. But most parents don't know about this. Most parents parent through that behavior-focused parenting. And that's why I have this course. And my parents were no different. And so I grew up doing very well in school and in music and other things. But I didn't ever feel like I was quite good enough because I was always hearing how I could do better. And that's the way performance-based parenting, that's the message that it sends. And so I grew up feeling very like a failure. Even though I performed very well in many things, I didn't think I could do anything well. And so I raised my children the opposite. And I didn't really know what I was doing. It was just a gift from God. He just kind of downloaded some intuitive things into me early on because he was preparing me for my calling, which is mentoring parents like I'm doing now. And hopefully this is helpful. But my kids, I just thought everything they did was amazing. And I told them so. And they grew up with a very strong self-esteem. And we know that what you think about yourself is what you're going to be. The Bible says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. In his heart, deep. What's embedded deep in you are those foundational truths about yourself that you learn when you're very young. Like we talked about in those first 3 years when you don't even have a say in it. Your self-esteem is actually being formed, what you think of yourself. And we know that what we believe we can achieve. I mean, these are just principles that are more widely known than they have been in the past. But that's 99.9% of success in anything. is believing in yourself and believing that you have value. Because when you see yourself as valuable, you treat yourself as valuable, and you expect other people to treat you as valuable. So when we destroy our children's feeling of worth and value, we're actually setting them up to be a victim of, some unhealthy relationships, because you're going to attract to you the kind of people that you expect, that will treat you the way you expect to be treated. And that happened to me as well. I went through 3 marriages and 3 divorces, and that's a long story, but I could look back and see that I was looking for that person that would treat me the way I thought I should be treated, which wasn't very well. And all because I didn't think very highly of myself, because that wasn't instilled in me as a child. And I don't want to say anything negative about my parents, and I'm not here. I'm just saying that most parents do this. And instead of building our children up, we're tearing them down. But it's because we haven't known how to parent any other way. So keep watching these videos, because I'm going to teach you how you can do everything from training your child to obey, to fulfilling his destiny, God-given destiny, all while sending approving messages that build him up into the fullness of who God made him to be. So keep watching, and leave your comments and let me know if this is helpful and if you have any questions. So I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care.